So I wanted to share a little story with you of what happened in our family this week. I gave my son, Matthew, he's 16 years old, that cup of juice. And, well, first I asked him, do you want this juice? And he said, okay, sure. And then he drank it, and then he made this grimace. And I was like, what is this? And he says, oh, no, I don't want this. And well, looking at that picture, what do you think he expected? Grape juice, okay. He expected grape juice, but what I gave him was, can you guess? Beet juice. So he said, oh, Mom, I thought you were giving me grape juice, and this tastes terrible. So, sorry. But on the other hand, I took, from the same batch, I took a glass of the beet juice and I gave it to Eric, my husband. And he said, and I said, this is much better than the one that Kevin made. And it's nice and sweet. And I used the juicer, so it's not, doesn't have all that pulp. So he drank it, and he said, wow, this is really good. Yeah, he was like, he actually liked it because, see, what was the difference? Was the expectation, right? Matthew was expecting grape juice, and he was disappointed when he got beet juice. And Eric, he expected some bad tasting beet juice, but he actually got very sweet. What? Good thing Kevin is not here. So it was a matter of expectation, right? And so in this story of Jesus healing the blind man, we will see how that idea of expectation is very important in this story. So let's go to the next slide and read the text. Mark 8, this is in verse 22. Then he came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. Next. And he looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. Then he put his hands on his eyes again and made him look up, and he was restored and saw everyone clearly. Then he sent him away to his house, saying, neither go into the town nor tell anyone in the town. And that is the reading for today. So when you hear this story, and there's a lot of healings that we read about in the Gospels, right? Some questions might go through your mind. Some of the questions that I thought of when thinking about this story was, why did Jesus spit in the man's eyes? Well, yeah, because there was healing when there was no spit that was used, right? Another question that I had is, why did Jesus have to kind of heal him twice, right? I think this is the first time that I know of that Jesus had to almost have a second try at the healing. So that was something that I thought about. And lastly, why did Jesus lead the blind man out of town to heal him? So these kind of questions I was pondering when I was thinking about the story. Next slide, please. So those were the questions. Next slide. And, when you come to things in the Bible that is not very clear and it's sort of mysterious, the go-to point should always be, where do I find the character of God in this? Where do I find the love of God in this story? And each of those questions that I thought about I kept on asking myself, where do I find the love of God in that? The answer to those questions. Next. And the key to this story, as I had mentioned about expectations, was, I think, for Jesus, turning expectations around. So when I saw that from that perspective, it really brought to mind and brought to life the character, the lovely character of God, the loving character of God. So, next slide. So let's first think of the blind man's perspective. Let's see what life, try to put yourself in his shoes. What was it like to be that blind man? Of course, it's always, even these days, it's hard to have blindness as a handicap. But in those days, it was more than just the handicap. It was also rejection from society, because it was thought that physical blindness, leprosy, anything like that was judgment from God, saying that he was a sinner. So people, when they looked at the blind man, saw somebody who was rejected by God. So he was always reviled, he was always rejected, and probably spat on a lot, saying that he was rejected by God. Next slide, please. So this blind man, from his past, he really needed to have his faith nurtured. Even in that small interaction with Jesus, he needed to know this God who was with him. So what he needed to know was that Jesus is loving and kind, that he has power to heal, that God hadn't cursed him and abandoned him, and number 4, Jesus wants to heal him. So think of those motivations for Jesus that he wanted to nurture in that blind man. So let's take a closer look at the story. Next slide, please. So first, remember, he is brought to, the blind man is brought to Jesus by his friends, and the friends say, please heal him. So what are the implications? He did not come on his own, okay? And so very likely that he did not know anything about Jesus and had very low expectation of this encounter. And the friends themselves had some preconceived notions of how Jesus might heal. In previous interactions, Jesus sometimes healed by word, like Jairus' daughter. He just said she'll be healed, and she was. And sometimes he touched them. Sometimes it depended on the circumstance, right? But what does Jesus do? Next slide, please. Jesus takes the blind man by the hand. And what does that imply? For that blind man, he had the touch of somebody who gently led him out. And that was a sign of love. That was a sign to the blind man that I can trust this man. So Jesus took him by the hand, led him out of town. Next slide, please. He leads him out of the town. So what motivation do you think Jesus had in taking him out of the town to heal him? Any answers? Any suggestions? Well, oh, wow, Lucy, that's such a great answer. Wow, actually, I didn't even think of that, but what a great answer. Like for him to be able to actually see, beauty of nature when he first sees that. Yeah, that's a great answer. Um, well, I was also thinking, but Great Lucy's was a great answer, was that Jesus wanted to shield him from curious onlookers and wanted to have privacy with him because a lot of times when Jesus healed, there was a lot of controversy, and some of the healed people got persecuted for being healed. So I think Jesus was one of the motivations was for Jesus to give him privacy. So next. Okay, so the biggest question is why the spit in the eye? Because that seems to be not very loving, not very kind, and Jesus could have healed him without the spit, right? So why did he spit in the blind man's eyes? So I don't know if I have the right answer, but this is one of the things I was thinking about. So one purpose might be to, again, turn that expectation around, because the blind man was used to being spat upon in revulsion, right? In rejection. But Jesus was showing him something different, was saying, I'm going to be giving you another perspective on who God is and who you are. So this is to kind of emphasize the difference in how Jesus was going to heal him. Next slide. And then after he spat, then he put his eyes on him. And then, next. And then he asked him, what do you see? And if you remember the text, he says he sees men as trees, like he didn't see clearly. So that was another curious point, right? Why does, why didn't Jesus give him clear vision from the very first, right? Isn't that something, Jesus obviously had the power to. Did he need to warm up a little bit? I don't think so, right? I think, there was a purpose to him having look and then seeing blurry and then doing it again, right? So I don't know if you ever thought of why Jesus had to have him look once and not be a perfect vision at first. But what I thought of in perspective of how is this going to help this man, right? So this interaction kind of prolongs that time that he will have with him. And so he's developing a trust relationship. Jesus is asking him, what do you see? And this man is not used to being treated with respect or asking really about his opinions about anything. So when Jesus asks him, what do you see? It's initiating that relationship, continuing to further that relationship, right? And in his tone and in his body language and in his voice, Jesus is revealing his heart, right? So you can imagine a gentle voice, kindness, softness, right? And then, and as you guys know, what happens when you first try something, you don't get it right away. And then after other times, finally you achieve what you want. Isn't it sweeter when you have failed attempts in the beginning? Yeah. So I think part of that may have played in that. And then, next slide, please. Second time. So after the blind man answers that he sees things, but not completely clearly, second time, Jesus just puts his hands on his eyes without the spitting, and then the second time, he was able to see perfectly. So there is a contrast between the first time and the second time. And, it's the second time it's as if Jesus is saying, I don't treat you as the world. I love you. I don't reject you. I now not only am God, but I am a God who loves you and wants your complete healing. And so, doing this second time really brought home to the blind man the fact that here is somebody who really cares about him, who really wants, and imagine if Jesus had just healed him without going through all these steps of taking him out of town and, doing the spit and doing it twice. What if he just had healed him right there on the spot, be healed, without touching him just instantly? What do you think would have happened? Well, as you can imagine, he would be so overwhelmed by getting his sight again that he would not have had that time to understand who this man is, even have this small interaction of realizing that here is somebody who really cares and loves about him. And finally, next verse, he tells him to go home and don't even go to the village. And again, I think this is to shield him from the questions of the Pharisees and may make things difficult for him. Next slide. So in this story of Jesus healing the blind man, examining the details reveal the tender heart of love that Jesus has for this blind man. The strange parts of the story end up emphasizing Jesus' compassion and thoughtfulness toward the man. So how about our story? Aren't we all blind in a certain sense? We are blind to how Jesus is reaching out to us because we are in darkness, because we refuse the light. We stumble about in our own world, believing the lies of the world and the devil, that God does not see us, that the pain in our lives is a result of punishment from God. We expect grape juice, but we get beet juice. So in Acts chapter 17, verse 27, it says, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. So as we stumble around in darkness, Jesus finds us and leads us to the light. He puts his hands on our blind eyes and gives us sight. What a beautiful and loving friend that we have. If you realize that Jesus is with you and wants to heal you and free you from the bondage that is binding you, I pray that you would stand up and pray with me.